Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 135 of the Sports Daily College Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells, and tonight I have got both Mike Koomar and Joe Meade with me. Just moments ago, one of the best finishes of the tournament. We are going to start there. Then we're going to double back to some of the games last night that happened after we recorded, and then we will go back to the games that happened earlier today. But guys, what a great finish there. St. John's and Rick Pitino are headed to the Sweet 16. They looked like they were in control for a majority of the game. Kansas makes a furious comeback to tie it late, but it's St. John's that gets across the line. Mike, we'll start with you. How about that one?
Yeah, I mean, this is an instant classic finish. You looked at this one. St. John's really did a great job of preventing Kansas from getting in transition in for the first 36 minutes of this game. Kansas was able to eke their way back in with a little bit of urgency and then a couple of we'll call them generous calls by the officiating. But St. John's, when it really seemed like this game was going into overtime. Kansas was able to foul them a bunch and stop their momentum in the last 10 seconds of this one. They're able to get a bucket at the rim and secure their first Sweet 16 bid since 1998. So great stuff by the Red Storm. This was just another instant classic, piggybacking off of some great games that concluded last night.
And there wasn't really much to that last play. I'm going to get to that clip, maybe sometime during this, but there's nothing to it. This was simply just a straight line drive from Dylan Darling, somebody who has been struggling tremendously. One for his last 20 from the field before that shot, and he knocks
Yeah.
it home, and St. John's is moving on. Joe, obviously this game was one that wasn't the prettiest to the modern eyes of offensive basketball, but both teams pretty clearly had a game plan. They were both super physical, and it's Rick Pitino that gets just a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to be positive. Like obviously they won the game, but I think, Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, they were outscored like by 14 in the last 5 minutes to even get it tied. Like
Yeah.
that's
Yes.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
ridiculous. Like that will not happen against I don't care who they played. Well, definitely it won't happen against Duke. But you're gonna pay for that. One of these remaining teams, whether it's UCLA, UConn, certainly Michigan State, that's their mantra. I think St. John's really dodged a bullet. I think they played 35 minutes of elite defensive basketball. The last 5 minutes was the St. John's I saw at the beginning of the year, which is why they're a five seed in the first place. So definitely need to get some things cleaned up. I think Bryce Hopkins saved their what's today. I think 6 of 6 from 3 point. Zuby Ejiofor had some clutch shots per usual, but Bryce Hopkins, I think, is the unsung hero.
Yeah, Hopkins,
Yeah,
18
Zuby Ejiofor
points.
also was so good on the defensive end too.
Yeah.
Had some great plays when defending against Darian Peterson, which you look at the disadvantage that he has, but the mobility that Ejiofor had really showed, and some of these perimeter plays kept him in a really good spot.
And Hopkins on the day, 6 of 13 from the field, but 6 of 9 from three. Doing some quick math, guys. Outside of him, St. John's was 5 of 26 from three. So it was a
Yeah.
clear game plan for Kansas to pack the paint, make him shoot it, and it worked for everybody except for Bryce Hopkins. So St. John's gets across the line. Obviously, their defense was the story here. They turned over Kansas 16 times, and off the top of my head, maybe half of them were before they even crossed half. I mean, inbounding the ball was such a real issue for Kansas, and you can't give away 16 possessions like that. St. John's has 15 more shot attempts from the field, despite having 6 less free throws. But yeah, what a great game here. And unfortunately for Kansas, Darren Peterson's college career is now over. All right, guys, let's go back to last night. Obviously, we needed to get to that one first. A really awesome game there. And the last two games last night were not much different. Both of them go down to the wire. The first one that went final was in Lincoln South, also known as Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Nebraska gets to the first Sweet 16 in program history over Vanderbilt, 74-72. It's a layup by Braden Frager with a couple of seconds left that gave him the victory, and then a three-quarter court shot from Tyler Tanner that nearly went in, but unfortunately for Vanderbilt, it just rattled out. So, Joe, obviously a tremendous success for Nebraska here on the macro, but they were able to get the job done in a pretty tight game.
Yeah, and what's amazing, Sean, is normally when Nebraska wins these games, they have one pop-off guy, usually a Price Sanford, certainly could be a Sam Hoiberg. But this game was really balanced.
Yeah.
I think you had multiple guys over 8 points. Yeah, I'm just doing the math here. Six guys over 8 to 15 points. That's not a crazy spread, right? That's not just Price Sanford carrying them. I think Jamarcus Lawrence made some nice plays as well. But Sean, the story here for me for the whole Cornhuskers is they lose like a lot of the important metrics, right? They have four more turnovers than Vanderbilt. They barely out rebound them, and they get across the line. This is a Nebraska team, Sean, that's been in a lot of close games this year, and certainly some like against Michigan, some against Iowa didn't go their way. Um, and they didn't look too hot in March a lot of times. They're pretty streaky. So for them to persevere through all that, I think it says a lot about the character of this team. Now, without getting into like non-basketball stuff, I really do think there's something to Nebraska being in all those close games. It showed. They throughout the year that you saw them panic, take some bad shots in those late game situations. This was not one of them. They were totally prepared. And I think Fred Hoiberg, honestly, we shouldn't talk about it on this cast. Aside from the Dusty Mays, aside from maybe the Todd Goldens of the world, he's probably, and along with Mark Bionting too, if they won this game, he's probably up there for Coach of the Year in my book. He really should be.
Yeah, and he did win Big Ten Coach of the Year over your coach Joe, who went 19-1 in the league, and he still didn't win Coach of the Year. It's because what Fred Hoiberg did was all that impressive. But Mike, this one I think is the true definition of a coin toss game. Tyler Tanner was unbelievable for Vanderbilt, 27 points. Nickel adds 16, and they just come up one bounce short, really. I mean, what a crazy game winner that would have been if it didn't Gordon Hayward. But
Yeah.
really, really solid effort from the year for Vanderbilt. But I do think that they will be leaving this season with a few what ifs.
Oh, 100%, especially when you look at the potential they had to win the SEC tournament championship game. That game really just came down to really like 2 minutes of kind of falling apart there coming down the stretch. You look at this one, and they had the lead for pretty much the entirety of the last 8.5 minutes of this game. Nebraska had a very, very short lead at that time, but uh, I mean, what an instant classic this was. It just seemed like when one team could make a three, the other team would answer the call right back. Truly, it felt like watching this game as a neutral party that you wanted both teams to advance. Both teams kind of felt like they deserved to that.
Yeah.
Tyler Tanner with a great shot, and this was a great year for Vanderbilt. They far exceeded expectations, specifically with that athletic department in general, but also with basketball. Just a bummer that it has to come to a close here. There's a lot of hurt people right now in Nashville.
Yeah, and it was. I think the main reason Nebraska won this game is because they had that brief stretch where they switched to a 1-3-1 zone. It took Vanderbilt a couple of times down the floor to figure it out, and that 2-3 possessions of not super crisp Vanderbilt offense may have been the difference. And
Yeah.
Fred Hoiberg deserves a lot of credit for that. you know, I thought the energy in the crowd was spectacular too. I thought that really made this game feel like it was more than just a round of 32 game. But it's Nebraska that is going to be going to the Sweet 16. They will face the winner of Iowa and Florida in Houston next Thursday or Friday. All right, the game after that was not much worse. It was the Panthers from High Point going up against Darius Acuff and the Razorbacks. Calipari just a little bit better. Arkansas advances 94 to 88. Another one of these games, Mike, where it looked like both teams deserved to move on. High Point shows that they belonged again against another team with some really great guards, but they just come up a little bit short. Arkansas and the Hogs are going to the Sweet 16.
Yeah, this was a feel good game, I think, for Cameron Fletcher at High Point, guy that played for Calipari moons ago at Kentucky before he has had a couple of transfers since then. He has 25 points off the bench in this one in 33 minutes of play. Nearly gets a double double, had 8 rebounds to go with it. But look, High Point just didn't have enough juice left in the tank come to the end of the game. Arkansas was just able to make more better execution coming down the stretch. Only made 9 threes in this game. That's not a lot for Arkansas, but they were very efficient shooting the basketball. They just looked too good on offense, and I think Arkansas needed an off night on the offensive end for High Point to end up getting the win. High Point hung around for a long, long time, but just couldn't get it to go coming down the stretch.
And Joe, we saw it in round one when they beat Wisconsin in a true coin toss game. I don't know if this was quite that, but they have now proven over the course of 3 days that they have competed with Nick Boyd, and not only competed, they beat Nick Boyd and John Blackwell and the Badgers, and now they went 39 of the 40 minutes with Darius Acuff. Obviously, this High Point team deserves a lot of credit, but at the end of the day, the other team was just a little bit better.
Yeah, and I think the difference here is I think Nick Boyd and John Blackwell are both fantastic, but Darius Acuff as a freshman is on a
Yeah.
completely different level. Him being from
Yeah.
the state of Michigan is an extra salt in the wound to fellow Spartan and Wolverine fans like myself. But getting back on track here, Sean, I think what it came down to is High Point made those shots late in that game, right? It's a tie game at the under four. They made those shots against Wisconsin when they were down. I think they took some good ones, right? Ones they normally convert on. I call them mastery shots, certainly to the casual eye, not great shots, but shots they've been hitting a lot of the year and shots they hit against Wisconsin. And unfortunately for them, didn't fall this time. 10 to 38, 26%. That's just not good enough, especially in a game of margins like this one against a way more talented team. So they bow out of the tournament. I think, it's pretty easy to call it Darius Acuff. I think Malik Thomas and Richmond in this game were also key factors for Arkansas, right? DJ Wagner really doesn't give you much off the bench. The starters
No.
really had to contribute. I know Wagner had a few assists, but this was really a mastery job by the starters. And I think two guys with double doubles, 10 and 12 rebounds, Malik Ewan as well. So Arkansas's stars show out. And I think when they do, they're a very difficult out. I'm not saying they're going to beat Arizona, but they're an extremely difficult out.
Yeah, this one was not the game for like people who like defense. I mean, the two guards, especially Acuff for Arkansas and Martin for High Point, they could basically get to the hoop whenever they wanted.
Yeah.
And I felt like High Point did a great job of keeping the tempo up. They knew that Arkansas was probably going to play six players, and they kept going at them, and they were not scared of the moment. I think they deserve a lot of credit. You just look at how bad the one-on-one defense here, 35 total assists, 69 total baskets. So not a lot of dishing and finding the open man. It was a lot of beating people off the dribble. And there's a bigger Darius Acuff conversation here, guys. I think for somehow in this great freshman class, he may have gone under the radar a little bit. I think there's a real argument that he should be the National Player of the Year. Now, I think Boozer's going to get it, but in terms of a player that is most important to their team and where Acuff stacks up in the John Calipari, career of great guards, I think this is going to be somebody that we're going to remember for a really long time because he never gets sped up. The moment is never too big for him. I think Darius Acuff somehow is underrated, but where do you guys think that he will end up in the National Player of the Year race or the NBA draft?
Yeah, I think you look at him and he definitely has top five draft capabilities. You kind of look on the run that he's on, and it is maybe not necessarily to the same degree as Kemba Walker, but it's awfully close. His ability to kind of put his team on his back and deliver. Look, he's not going to get the same National Player of the Year recognition that Cam Boozer will. It largely in part because his team is just not a very good defensive team. He's not a very good defensive player, if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
But his ability to score and score in bunches is impressive. In this game, he had more points than he had minutes played. 36 points in 34 minutes played is incredibly impressive. But you look at his NBA draft stock, and he's got lotto pick written all over him.
All right, well, let's move the calendar to Sunday. We had two games that went final before St. John's, Arkansas, which we already talked about. And Joe, game one of Sunday added another Big Ten team into the Sweet 16. Purdue takes down Miami 79-69. Pretty decent performance for Miami. They certainly didn't let Purdue put them away, but the Boilers proved to be too much. And after everything that's happened this season for Purdue, they have won the Big Ten tournament and have gone to the second weekend. So what looked like a pretty ugly end to this era for the Boilermakers all of a sudden is looking pretty good.
Yeah, and I think Purdue, which might be shocking to say for a lot of Big Ten fans, I think their shooting got them through this game. They got out rebounded by the Hurricanes, equal amount of turnovers for both sides. But CJ Cox, I think he could be an X factor here. I think Fletcher Lawyer's proven in a lot of these games. He's pretty clutch. 24 points. Uh, and TKR and Braden Smith, you know what you're going to get out of those guys, especially when you have a presence down low and a height advantage. Let's call it what it is, like a decisive advantage in the post with him and Clough. But CJ Cox also rating in three threes. I think that's what could advance them to the next level here. You do assume that they're going to be favored in that next game against Texas. For them to get back to the Final Four, Sean, it's got to be guys like that, right? I don't think they're getting enough from their bench right now. They haven't gotten a lot from their bench in a while, consistently anyway. CJ Cox's and Oscar Clough's, those are the two guys that are gonna have to step up. I can count on, just because they've been there long enough, the big three to do what they do. But for them to get past an Arizona, an Arkansas, certainly maybe a Michigan, Iowa State, like whoever comes out of there, the Final Four, for them to get title number one of those guys has to be a consistent factor. I think that's kind of been a theme throughout the year, even when Purdue was humming here, right? Can they get more from the bench? Can there be a fourth guy, fourth option? And it sounds greedy, but at this point, it needs to be greedy. That bench isn't consistent. God forbid TKR, Fletcher Lawyer don't have a great night from the field. You're going to need someone else to save them. But that's why I'm really impressed with Purdue, because it looks like they could be finding those answers. Not too little, not too late.
I feel like today, Joe, watching this, Cox goes down with the injury, and I think he's okay. It looked like maybe a
Yeah.
hyperextension. I think he's okay. I thought he kept them in the game in the first half. I thought Miami was getting way better shots, and it looked like they might have a chance to bury Purdue and get up by 12, 15 points, but Purdue made enough shots to stay in it, and then they made a couple of really good defensive adjustments in the second half when it comes to how they dealt with those wing ball screens. So they, at the end of the day, I think we're looking at this game saying like this was not anywhere near Purdue's best, but they still were sort of decisively better than the other team. They'll get Texas in the next round, like you said. But Mike, we had Fletcher Lawyer have 24 points on 7 field goal attempts. That's pretty efficient. Um,
Yeah.
so on the other hand, you had a great Fletcher Lawyer game, but a bad game from Braden Smith. 3 for 12 from the field, 8 assists, 8 turnovers. Uh, I don't know how many more times they're going to get away with this bad of Braden Smith games. And when it comes to their next matchup against Texas, uh, I don't know if this performance does it.
Yeah, you look, Braden Smith's got to be better. 8 turnovers, certainly unacceptable from him. I think if Purdue's going to end up making a run to the Final Four, CJ Cox has to be healthy. And all signs point to that he should be good to go next weekend, but he's got to be able to play some serious minutes. And then also, Purdue's going to have to be better on the boards. You look at a Texas team that's really physical and is able to kind of dominate the boards like they were against Gonzaga, against Ike. Look, Purdue was -8 on the boards in this game.
That's
If
shocking.
they're -8 against the boards against Texas, they might be going home.
And I'm so shocked that they were -8 on the boards, um, because they, one, turned it over 12 times, which is a lot, and two, they made a lot
Yeah.
of shots, so there's not as many opportunities for defensive rebounds. And look, Miami turned it over 12 times too, but they were able to rebound 14 of their 35 misses, which is pretty good. But yeah, I think we talked a lot about Miami this year and how impressed we were, but look, they basically played 6 players in this game too, and Joe did say they do need more from their bench, Purdue, but at least they have a bench to go to. A lot
Yeah.
of these teams don't, so we'll probably get to a state of the program Miami video at some point in the spring. And then Joe and I certainly will with Purdue, but the state of the program is not yet finished for the Boilermakers. They move on to face Texas in the Sweet 16 next week. All right, game 2 of the day, also in St. Louis, was between the 2 seed Iowa State Cyclones and Kentucky. It was a nice start from the Wildcats. They got themselves a double-digit lead early, but the Cyclones turned the water off on defense. They ended up going on a run to take a 1-point lead at halftime. And then they started making some shots in the second half. Mike, all of a sudden you look up and this is a 19-point Iowa State win without their best player. This was a pretty impressive game from Otzelberger and the Cyclones.
Yeah, you looked at this game at the start and you kind of wonder, whoa, what's happening here? And look, Iowa State made absolutely nothing in the first 15
Yeah.
minutes of this game, and they're one of the most explosive offensive teams in the country. So finally, they were able to get some of their quality shots that they were shooting. They finally started to go down. They played some lockdown defense, and it was over by the 10-minute mark in the second half. This game was a blowout. But look, I think this has kind of exposed what kind of team that Kentucky is, and they were able to survive in advance against Santa Clara. Took a half court buzzer beater to do it. But this Kentucky team did not have Sweet 16 written over it the entire season. We saw it early in December when they took on Gonzaga. We saw it periodically throughout the SEC season. This is an unacceptable season for the squad down there in Lexington, and Mark Pope's going to need to have a big turnaround in year three for the Wildcats to retain him before they start looking for another coach. Could be interesting because there's potential for a few really good coaching opportunities to be open coming up. You talk about UNC. We don't know about Hubert Davis, but also with Bill Self and Kansas, we'll got to them in a little bit. They have not made it very far in the tournament in the last 4 years, and with his health declining, that could be a job open soon. So Kentucky might be right there with them as well. Oweh can only do so much for the Wildcats this year.
This, like, defensively from Iowa State, I was so impressed. I mean, they basically
Yeah.
decided that they were going to stop Kentucky from scoring when it was 20. It was like 20-8 Kentucky, and Iowa State's like, look, we're not going to be as good offensively today because we don't have Jefferson. And at the end of the game, it's like, well, of course, like, what, they can just play great defense, and look, they might need to make more shots, but they end up getting to 80. They end up getting to 46% from the field. They hit 9 threes. So they turned this one around a lot, and it wasn't looking so great early on from them, but all of a sudden you beat a solid team by 19, and you're moving on to the Sweet 16. Joe, obviously the injury might limit the ceiling for this Cyclones team, but you had to be impressed with what they did without Jefferson today.
I think that second half was scary, to be honest, just as someone who's a fan of that region. Human nature, you're without Josh Jefferson. You don't really know how long he's out. I really don't want to care to speculate on that because I have really no idea.
Yeah.
But for them to like turn over Kentucky 20 times is ridiculous.
It
And
was simple, like pass and catch, that was difficult at times for the guys in
Yeah.
blue.
yeah, and another thing that TJ Otzelberger, and I know Sean's been on him sometimes for this, not necessarily hard, but there's been a lot of tournaments they've fallen, a little short of expectations. I thought this was a game they could probably do that. Best players injured. Kentucky, they've underperformed all year, as Mike said, but they're pretty capable, right? They've beaten some really good teams all year. Whoever they have in this next game is certainly going to be a more than worthy opponent. So if they can keep this going, man, that Elite Eight game, like no matter who it's against, whether it's Michigan, Texas Tech, or Bama, that could be quite the game. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, they have the
Yeah.
defense, I think, to stop any offense, whether it's the number one offense or number two. Now, neither of those are in the Midwest region, so they're not going to have to face them until the Final Four potentially. But yeah, very impressed here. And look, I think Jefferson really helps them a lot offensively, but I don't know if his presence is all that missed when he's out on the defensive end. They can get a little smaller. They can be a little quicker on the 3-point line. They don't get beat off the bounce as much, but still, like, obviously he's the best player on the team by far. Big 12, first team player. If they can get him back, they're going to throw him in there and let him go to work. But guys, that is pretty much it for the games. We have a few going on now. We have a few that are later. Obviously, a lot of people, I think, are probably going to watch this after the games are over, but let's wrap this up with one thing that both of you are looking forward to in the games later today. Mike, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, right now, obviously, it's going to go final before we a lot of people see this, but Iowa State, Florida is a really interesting one that's coming down the stretch. It's going to be pretty close to tied near halftime, so I'm really excited about that one. And then also, it's in the bracket. I'm sticking to my guns. Look out for UCLA to knock out UConn. UCLA has been vastly improved over the last month of the basketball season. Had some big wins to include Michigan State in the Big Ten tournament. They also beat Illinois in the regular season. UConn's been struggling pretty significantly coming down the stretch. We talked about that loss to Marquette, loss to St. John's, and they also kind of limped in with that first round game against Furman. They didn't look all that good in that one either. So look out for UCLA to take down UConn.
Yeah, it's definitely a matchup that I think when the referees get their assignments, That's one that they're going to be hoping to avoid. But
Yeah.
unfortunately for three of them, that is not the case. But Joe, obviously you're obvious Michigan fans watching that last game tonight a little bit closer because the winner you'll be playing next week. But anything to add on these last few games tonight?
No, I mean the one thing we talked about off air is, Mike and Sean think to beat Michigan, rating 50% from three by halftime is a necessity. While I tend to agree, teams have done it pretty consistently. That's why I'm pretty amazed people are chalking us in. St. Louis shot 38%, right around their season average. And yes, we dominated, but Texas
Give
Tech and Alabama have a lot more talent and a lot more capabilities. So, this idea that, oh, Michigan, it's fine if teams shoot 40% from three. I promise it's not fine.
Yeah, and Michigan's offense, Joe, has been pretty solid through these first two games, and I think you have certainly left a little bit to be desired on the defensive end. But fortunately, it hasn't mattered because you've also shot those same percentages. But guys, we're going to have some matchups for the Sweet 16 a little bit later. We have a few of them already. St. John's Duke on Friday, but I think we're going to wrap it up here. If you're watching live, thanks for tuning in. You can get back to the games. We've got a tight finish here between Tennessee and Virginia, and then we have another game that's tied at halftime, and then three more that still have to tip off later tonight. So we're going to wrap it up here. I want to thank everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.